Welcome to What That Means with Camille. In this series, Camille asks top technical experts to explain, in plain English, commonly used terms in their field. Here is Camille Morhart.
Hi, and welcome to today's podcast, InTechnology. We're going to focus on zero waste today with Marina McCoy. She does education in zero waste, and she also has a couple of companies. Tell us what the companies are, Marina.
So my first one is Waste Free Earth. It's been in business for 10 years now, which is really cool. And we do zero waste education for events is how I started off. So we would set up reusable systems at events and educate vendors, attendees, artists. And then when COVID happened, we switched to businesses. And then I also opened up a zero waste refill shop in downtown Burlington, where I'm based. And there you could go in and refill on laundry detergent, hand soap, conditioner, shampoo, essentially anything that's home goods related that comes in a single-use bottle, you could refill at the shop.
One of the things that you focus on is kind of individual waste reduction at an individual scale. How did you choose to do that as opposed to look at a mass scale or sort of company or industry-wide scale?
I look at it through a lens of the ripple effect, because when you start to make changes in your everyday life to reduce your waste, if you're in the manufacturing business or if you're in an office that's producing a lot of waste, once you start to build that foundation of zero waste education, you'll start to see other ways to reduce waste. So people, like when we do workshops, they'll email me afterwards and say, oh, I got my office to now reduce the amount of printing that they're doing. Oh, I found out that this isn't recyclable, so we're no longer ordering that, or we just completely eliminate it. So that's where I see the big difference. So on an individual level, yes, it could get discouraging when you find out that all these companies are producing way more waste than you could ever imagine. But if you start with the individual, they actually have a big impact in the grand scheme of things. It's just that sometimes people don't realize it.
Okay, so you look at people to be able to extend what they've learned beyond their home environment.
Yeah, there's the life cycle assessment programming that a lot of businesses tend to use. So if you're producing a product, it's not just about the waste at the end of the life. It's about how much energy and resources went into it, how much water went into it, how much energy went into it. What about the raw materials? So a lot of companies use that assessment to better gauge how much waste they're producing and the whole life cycle of it. And that's why I bring up how waste is kind of at the center of climate issues, because we're talking about carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and how we should reduce it. And a lot of that comes from factories. But what are those factories producing? They're producing a lot of single-use items. They're producing items with a planned obsolescence so that they're going to break after a few uses or after a couple of years. So for me, that's where we really focused on is how can we make products that last longer so that their life cycle assessment is greater instead of being of lesser quality that adds more waste into the environment. And then that means more resources being used.
Do you see this as driven by the consumer level or the end user level, or do you see it as being driven by innovation within industry?
Well, it started as a consumer movement through social media and other outlets. They became more aware of the waste that we were producing. But companies, I would say, took a little bit longer to catch on because there are money-saving incentives with it, but then there are some more economic financial investments that people need to make in order to be more waste-free. But I've seen a greater increase of companies now listening to consumers asking for more sustainable packaging, which has been really awesome to see. But then along those lines, it opens up to more greenwashing, where companies add on the recycling symbol because there's no regulations on if products could have the recycling symbol on them, even if they're not recyclable. So even though other companies are taking greater strides to be more sustainable and zero waste, you have other companies that are greenwashing their efforts, making it seem like they're doing more than they actually are.
As a consumer, how would you, or as a business who's making contract decisions, how do you know if you're being greenwashed? What are some kind of telltale signs on that front?
It really depends on the business and what they're producing. So for packaging, if it's a lot in the colors that they're using, if they're using green, and also the words that they're using, like eco-friendly, green. Like, what does green actually mean? What does eco-friendly mean? What does non-toxic mean? Because technically, or chemical free, technically
Mm-hmm.
water is a chemical.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really hard to figure out at first if a product is actually sustainable or not, because also, like, what does sustainable mean anymore? Because there's like financial sustainability and environmental sustainability and social sustainability. But to bring it back to the greenwashing efforts, you really have to do your research on, like, even just a simple Google search. You could find out if something is recyclable.
If they're not global standards for zero waste, then is each company or possibly even industry or region defining, like you said, sustainability is kind of I suppose reasonably well agreed upon at this point to have three legs, right? The sort of social, economic, and environmental. Is each company or industry or region setting a goal within each of those legs and then stating how close they are to that, and that's our best definition? Or is there any kind of holistic definition for it?
More and more states are putting in place zero waste plans. Like, we have one here in Vermont. And for us, we're trying to reduce our overall waste consumption by 15%. And that's a pretty ambitious goal. But our landfill, I'm blanking on how many years that we have left on our landfill, but it's coming up in about two to 3 decades. So for us, we're really trying to reduce the amount of waste and figuring out what industries are producing the most. I know other states around the country are doing that as well, but then you have states that don't see the pressure for it just yet. As a whole around the world, I don't see any big global standards for it, but I think it's great for everyone to push through with it.
I know some things that are kind of popular right now are separating out compost so you don't have food waste going into landfill.
For us, we have this zero waste roadmap or waste-free living timeline that we call Waste Free Earth, where it has 5 different steps that you could take. The first step is inventorying your waste. So going through a section of your house or multiple different sections of your house. I usually tell people to start in the kitchen or the bathroom. Go through, and it depends on how in detail you want to go, but I organize it all by materials: plastic, aluminum, cardboard, paper. So write down everything, and then you'll be able to see your biggest key waste contributors. From there, you could move on to step 2, where you'll eliminate 3 things immediately. So say you're chewing a lot of gum, or you have magazine and junk mail subscriptions that are coming in. You could eliminate those pretty easily. And then step 3 is reducing what you're having. So maybe you are really big on eating yogurt and you're buying 5 of the little containers each week. Instead, go for the bigger containers. So that's a way to reduce the waste that you are producing. So you don't always have to eliminate something right off the bat. And sometimes you won't be able to eliminate something completely because it can be unrealistic in many different counties across state lines. It's just not as accessible to people. And then we say step 4 is to swap out, and to swap, like if you're using single-use water bottles, go for a reusable one. Same with single-use napkins and tissues, go for a hanky instead. I love my hanky. I use it for everything. But we want to get people to do steps 1 through 3 first, because you don't want to feel like you have to buy stuff to be zero waste. And then lastly, on step number 5 is collect your waste. If you start collecting your waste right off the bat, you're going to get overwhelmed because people always think that they're producing less waste than they actually are. So once you do steps 1 through 4, then we say to collect your waste for at least a week. A month is a really good number to kind of go for, but sometimes, again, it's unrealistic. If you have a family of 4, if you have a kid, it's a lot different than being a single person collecting their waste. So we always try to let people know, do what you can, where you can, and allow room for error, because we're all human. But if more people start to reduce their waste and push towards companies to have better packaging available to them. So if maybe you're not able to reduce your waste, still writing to the companies and asking them to package more sustainably. I'm not really into the canceling culture that's out there, I think it's better to like contact them directly and raise a movement through that. But if we all start to reduce our waste little by little, doing what we can where we can, I am hopeful that our carbon input into the atmosphere will drastically reduce. Because if you're looking for how much energy it takes to recycle a aluminum can versus making a new one, you're saving 95% of the energy it takes to produce a new can when you recycle a can. So aluminum is highly recyclable. If you're not able to completely eliminate something from your key waste contributors, looking at recycling and composting is a great effort too.
Is there something kind of big scale that needs to happen in order for people to truly make this kind of a transition if they're interested in doing it?
Yeah, I would love to see more regulations on what companies can put on their packaging. A lot of the responsibility ends up on the consumer, which I don't think is right because we're not the ones producing the waste. Sometimes you just don't have the choice because the plastic industry lobbied to have the recycling symbol on their plastic without it actually being recyclable. So people see that sign and they see plastics like 1 through 7 on there, but that doesn't mean that it's actually recyclable. It's just a plastic identifier for what type of plastic it is. So that creates a lot of confusion. And also people could put the word recyclable on it or made with recycled content, which doesn't mean that it's recyclable at the end of its life. So it's really confusing for the consumer to actually know what is recyclable and what's not. And same with compostable and the word biodegradable. People think that biodegradable equals compostable, but everything is biodegradable within due time. It's just a matter of how long it is. Is it a couple months or is it 500 years? It's tricky. So that's why we really try to educate people when we do trainings and workshops so that you feel empowered to make better decisions when you are going to the store and again, talking to different companies and seeing if they can reduce the amount of plastic that they're using.
It seems to me, ideally, it's not a matter of compromising what you're using or what you're wanting, and rather replacing it with experiences or items that are not a drain on the environment. Everything has trade-offs, right? But if you're using solar, and again, I understand there's battery implications there, but if you're using solar, then it might not matter if you're reducing your net use. If it's like real time coming into your house, who cares how much you use if it's coming in from your roof? Or I suppose there could be a closed loop system with water where it doesn't matter because you're putting it all back. It's all coming back out clean again, versus more of a constrained approach or limitation approach to things. I'm just wondering what gets people comfortable making a change.
I would say when they know more of the information and they feel empowered to do something. For me, once I started to find out more about food waste, which led me down the whole rabbit hole of waste, I got a little bit discouraged, but I felt empowered to do something because I realized that I had the ability to really take a hold of this and reduce waste where I could. Whereas maybe that's not the case for some people, again, depending on where you live. But for me, I was able to make that shift and empower others to do that as well through education and through watching documentaries and reading books and listening to podcasts and also touring recycling facilities. It's really fascinating going there. And when we were producing sustainability departments for events, we would sort through all the trash. So we learned so much about human behavior and what people were consuming and also where they were getting stuck on, like, again, those packs of like soup and water that looked like they're coming in a cardboard container. A lot of people, again, thought that they were recyclable. So we had to switch our signage and our education to let people know that it wasn't, because it's not as easy saying paper is recyclable, cardboard, glass, and aluminum, because if something's made of all those, then people think that it makes it recyclable. But really, you just want one material, like glass and aluminum, because again, the MRF and the recycling facility can't tear that apart. It has to be special recycling. For one event over the course of a couple of years, we were able to go from 3 30-yard landfill dumpsters to just 1 landfill dumpster. So we had a massive decrease in that. And another one, we were able to reduce the overall waste consumption by 120,000 pounds. And that's just, again, through going in, working with vendors, educating attendees, educating artists on what is recyclable, compostable, and items that are banned from the event, which leads to the reduction of waste. So it's really fascinating. I love doing that work.
What's the first thing you flip to if you're looking up like a corporation to see if they're zero waste or moving toward it or sustainable? What do you look for?
First, we do a waste audit. We ask them if they've ever done a waste audit before. And if they haven't, we lay down a tarp, put on some jumpsuits, and go through their trash, recycling, and compost if they're doing it. Because from there, we could really see the basic knowledge that they have on the different types of waste streams. Then we could start initiating the programming with trainings, workshops, educational signage. So that's kind of how we figure out if a company is inherently zero waste on the foundational side, like educating their staff members. And then from a first glance too, when we have the interview, we sit down with them in the consult, we'll ask them what initiatives they have in place.
You're looking at what the cost is or the environmental cost is to operate the business, but what about products that they're producing, or what about the services or products that are going into their products? Do you look at kind of the supply chain coming in and the energy being used in production and things like that?
That's more the life cycle assessment, which we aren't experts in it as much as we are with the foundational education side of things, like working with the staff members, working with certain departments on reducing their key waste contributors. Because for me, I'm not a manufacturing expert. But again, if we educate the manufacturing team on what is generally recyclable, compostable, and what is landfill, and there's no specialty recycling programs for, then when they're building their stuff and the engineers, they're now going to have more information so that they could go for certain materials instead of other ones. And that also, like if they have someone on the team that is doing the life cycle assessment, it all works together.
Is there anything being argued about right now in the zero waste space?
I would say it's mainly greenwashing and compostable products, because most compost facilities are no longer taking compostable products, but you see people out there starting to produce compostable mailers, but those actually aren't getting accepted. And you have the compostable plastics. Those are no longer getting accepted at compost facilities. So for us, it's really important to educate the community, the staff members, that the compostable products are actually no longer compostable.
Do they just have too many of them, or?
So it's kind of complicated, I guess, in ways, but also simplistic. So to have a compostable product, you're altering corn per se to make it compostable. And that requires a lot of energy to be used and resources to like grow the crop and then convert it into a form of plastic. Mm-hmm. And they tend to have a higher melting rate of like 180, 200 degrees. And you don't want your compost pile to be that hot because it's going to kill the nutrients that you want to help grow the food. When we found out that things couldn't be recycled if they had food waste on them, we went to compostable products instead of looking at like reducing our waste or using reusables. We just immediately jumped to the next best single-use plastic or compostable plastic item instead of really trying to reduce and reuse our stuff. So now, since the compostable stuff is no longer compostable, we're going back to trying to reduce waste and use reusables instead.
Thank you, Marina. I appreciate the conversation. I certainly learned a little bit about zero waste during our conversation, and I appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity. It's been a blast.
Never miss an episode of What That Means with Camille by following us here on YouTube, or search for InTechnology wherever you get your podcasts.
The views and opinions expressed are those of the guests and author and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Intel Corporation.